Children's Services, Bennington County Head Start, Early Head Starts, Connecting the Dots Part 2. I'm Rebecca Fisher-Ware. I'm director of the program, and I'm pleased to have you here today. Part 2 is Hope. It's looking at positive of the ACEs that we looked at together just a couple of months ago. I would like to thank Stephanie Light for organizing this for us. And also I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie at this point to introduce our panelists. So thank you very much for coming.
Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Connecting the Dots series. As Rebecca said, in our first session, we focused on understanding adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and how adversity can shape development, health, and well-being across the lifespan. Today, we shift the lens from adversity to possibility. So this session introduces the HOPE framework, which is healthy outcomes from positive experiences, which reminds us that while adversity matters, so do relationships, safety, belonging, and moments of joy. HOPE helps us focus on what supports resilience and healing, and how positive experiences can buffer the impact of stress and trauma. As community partners, educators, and service providers, we all play a role in creating these positive experiences for children and families. Today's panel will explore what HOPE looks like in practice and how we can intentionally build it into our everyday work. We're glad you're here and look forward to a meaningful conversation. I will introduce our panelists, and then we can dive into the conversation before ending with a Q&A session. So we have Rachel Burnham, psychiatric nurse practitioner and senior healthcare leader with United Counseling Service. We have Christine Lacrosse, who is a family advocate at Sunrise Family Resource Center, and Lori Metcalf, director of Northshire Day School. And we have more extensive bios on their backgrounds on the handout in front of you. Okay, so let's get started. For those unfamiliar, and I'm going to call on you, Lori, as our resident expert. What is the HOPE framework, and how does it connect to ACEs?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. In addition to working at NBS, I work with Tufts University as a training facilitator, and more recently, a HOPE champion, helping organizations become HOPE Informed or HOPE certified. So, as Stephanie mentioned, HOPE stands for Healthy Outcomes from Positive Experiences. It was really developed as a complement to the ACEs framework and not to replace it. That's space for both. So where ACEs understands risk, HOPE helps us to understand protection and possibility. And the HOPE framework identifies 4 building blocks that support lifelong well-being and positive health outcomes. So the first building block is relationships, having safe and supportive relationships as a family, with other people, with other children, and with other adults. Environment is the second building block, and that is having access to safe, stable, equitable environments where children can live, learn, play, and everyone. Was the building blocks, although are focused on the positive childhood experiences, they do assign to all of us across the lifespan. The third building block is engagement, and so having opportunities for that social and civic engagement to develop that sense of belonging and connection. And then the fourth building block is emotional growth, opportunities for emotional growth where children feel supported through difficult events and emotions. And so even when adversity is present, positive experiences really matter. They're very important.
Thank you. So why is it important to look not only at adversity, but also at positive experiences?
So anybody who wants to jump in? Okay. So focusing on adversity really can unintentionally lead us to that deficit-based thinking, right? HOPE shifts that question that we often hear, what happened to you, to what's happening for you, and what's possible then. Research shows that positive experiences really can buffer the impact of stress and trauma, and it's directly linked to positive social, emotional health outcomes. So why it's so critically important is that the research actually indicates that the absence of positive childhood experiences can be more damaging to long-term health outcomes than the presence of adverse childhood experiences. I'm going to say it one more time. I think this to me was wow, I've been focusing on my wrong thing, right? The absence of positive childhood experiences actually may have a more detrimental effect on long-term health outcomes than the presence of adverse childhood experiences. So, this approach really focuses on restoring that agency, that dignity, that optimism for children and families and professionals, and allows us as people working to support families and children to have a plan for things that are within our control, the things that we actually can affect, right? We may not be able to control what faces a child may be experiencing in their life, right? I can't control if I'm working with a child or a family who currently has substance misuse, but I can choose what I'm creating and how I'm putting those building blocks in place for this child family to buffer that adverse childhood experience.
So let's dive into those building blocks a little bit. And I'd like each of you to give some examples from your work about how you incorporate these building blocks. So let's go through one by one, because I'm not sure I remember them all. But the first one was environment, right? Relationships was first. So let's talk about relationships.
The most key one to anything that you're doing is get into the relationship first.
Okay, so let's each go through how we see relationships as a positive experience of our work.
So building relationships, myself, it's like priority. Of course, being consistent and positive in their lives. I'm very good myself in talking to parents, children about their interests, what it is that they want to see happen to them. But some ways that I can incorporate just like knowing their relationships with other people, their lives. So, on eco mapping or I've done geogram just so I can have a little picture of like who's involved with the kids and who's supportive, happy as supportive, and sort of helping them build on those relationships. So for me, being a healthcare worker and working in psychiatry, I think people come to see me with a fair amount of skepticism, just kind of right off the bat. So I work on building rapport and building a relationship before I even start talking about, I'm not even going to start talking about medicine. I'm not going to start talking about trauma. I'm not going to start talking about any of those things until I start building a rapport with somebody. Whether if it's a child, I'm going to play a game with them and, I'm going to talk about what did you do at school today and, who got in trouble at school today. That's always better than asking, how was your day? Because we always know, we know how that goes, like, bye. So, but if you ask, who got in trouble at school today, that's always a much more interesting conversation. But when I think about building relationships, it makes me think about my other work in crisis with and about, suicide prevention. And one of the biggest things, that we could do to help, prevent suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, suicide, is building relationships with others and, feeling like there are human connections. And so starting that as early as possible is how you do that. So giving examples of what a human connection, a positive human connection feels like those types, as early as possible is how we could start.
And as a follow-up to this building block, how do positive relationships serve as a counterbalance to adverse experiences?
Yeah, sure. So, not only are they like a counterbalance, right? This is the crux that builds that positive childhood experience. A single, consistent, caring adult, care provider can literally change a child's developmental trajectory, right? Positive relationships help to regulate stress, support brain development, and really build trust, which is very foundational in any type of relationship, but very foundational in order for the child or the family to be able to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, right? So even though relationships don't erase adversity, they change how adversity is then experienced and processed for that individual. And it is one of the reasons why we really focus on relationships first in all the work we do, right? Because without that, nothing meaningful is going to come from your work together. There has to be that understanding, there has to be that comfort, there has to be that acceptance, and that connection for everything to build off of that from there.
And then the second building block, that one's environment, right? So what role do safe and stable environments play in building resilience?
So I would start with, I always start for the other one too. I guess I always do a lot of things. The Maslow's, hierarchy means, you can't really focus on anything until you feel safe and secure. So you can't, if a child doesn't feel safe, they cannot start developing any kinds of skills, and they can't engage in anything, really. Can't really have any expectations from them. So if their environment is not conducive to development of any kind, that's where you really need to start. And that's, this changed really how we look at schools, right? So the focus is supposed to be education, but we can't even start focusing on education and if these kids don't feel safe and secure and they're not eating at home and, getting what they eat, their basic needs met, right? So you have to really start there and set that foundation before we start working on things like algebra and geometry and stuff like that. So the environment, it's really, really key.
So, just like formulating a response to that, I think that home environments look a lot of different ways. And sometimes give instability to a lot different way. But I was thinking along the lines of environments like, having access to quality tribes, programs, the ability for families to not only send their children there, but being a part of that community. But, that's building relationships also. So I'm kind of rambling, but I'm just sort of thinking in my head all the time. But good. Yeah, I think to build on that, you have your home environment, you might have a school environment. We also have environments in our organizations and our agencies, right? And so when we think about environment being that foundation for safety, for stability, for learning, for healing and growth, you have to think about what's physically safe, right? What's emotionally safe? What provides a sense of predictability and a sense of belonging? And we all have a role in creating these conditions, right? What does it look like, feel like, experience when a family comes through your agency store or even through your office door, right? Have you ever looked outside of your office looking in to see what messages might be reflected back to people who are entering, or your colleagues, right? The employees that you work with. And the other thing that's really important is equity really matters here, right? And so it needs to be safe and stable and create a sense of belonging for all. And the people who are experiencing it, that's the most important factor, not our perception of what we think we might be doing or what our intention is, right? It's really looking at, okay, well, what's our impact? If my intention is to create, when you come here, you know that this is a welcoming face for all people, but is that how you're feeling when you're coming to my space or you're entering into a session with your practitioner, or you're coming in for a family meeting? What are messages that are happening in the environment? For those who are early childhood educators, exactly how the important environment is, right? Because it's literally your other teacher in the room is the environment that you're creating. It's true across all family serving organizations. right? The environment matters. What that looks like and that feels like, it matters. And people will keep returning to places that they feel comfortable and safe and feel a sense of connection and belonging. If you think about it in your own lives, right? Where are the places that you're excited to go? Who are the people you're excited to spend time with? What makes you feel seen and heard? And why do you keep engaging with that, right? Why do you keep returning to that environment? What do you set up in your own for that? And to Christine's point, like that can look really different, right? So it's not me going into your home environment, you're like, well, if you just did this and this and this, right, that would really promote the building block of environment for this environment. Black people, we have to reflect, we have to check ourselves, we have to really be open to like what's important to each and every family that they work with.
Something that you said reminded me of something. The predictability. A lot of the kids that we see who have a lot of their history, I kind of see their life as sort of like this, right? And they count on us, the people's lives, to be this constant. And they know that when they see us, they interact with us, they're going to get this. And next time it's going to be this. And the next time after that, it's going to be this. And when everything else in their life, it might be this, it might be that, it might be this, it might be that. They're not sure what they're going to get. But they know that when they interact with us, it's always going to be the same thing. And that's comforting. That lowers their stress. That lowers their anxiety. That predictability is really what they're counting on. And that's what builds those positive experiences. And that can rebuild your things that you're talking about. And your things. And that's it. That's really what they need, what they thrive on. So spontaneity is not always a good thing. But and that's how we, that's our contribute with our environment. She just by not taking.
Yeah, I mean, the world can feel really unsafe for individuals, even on they're complex funds, right? And so they are seeking those places, those safety, those places of consistency, those places where they know they can engage with the person they have their relationship with, and that they're going to get the they need. And that, like Christine, I think you mentioned, like, they know when you say you're going to come, you're going to show up, right? And Rachel mentioned, when you come to this space, this is going to happen, right? And again, going back as being an early childhood educator at heart, and going to go back to early childhood education, it's the same thing when you're working with young children day in and day out, right? Those routines are really important. That continuity of educator, care provider, it's really important. It's very meaningful. And not just to children, right? To one another as well. Like when, your co-teacher doesn't show up and all of a sudden you have a cell that you're not familiar with, or the children are not familiar with, like that can be difficult for a whole part because I'm not. So how we think about this and how we talk about this with one another is important because we all have a role to play in that, right? How do we set up our days so that there are those moments of continuity and consistency? And I understand, and sometimes that can be challenging, especially with, some graduate staffing patterns and whatnot. But you can have consistency of language. You can have consistency of routine, right? That consistency of the environment is now also the teachers change. That relationship might not be there for that day. That environment just became a whole lot more important, right? Because that's where they're looking. That's what they're thinking about. Where's my safe place from this in this space? And I'm in that.
So let's talk about examples from your work from the third building block, which is engagement. Am I right? Yeah, so examples of engagement in your work.
Can you tell me the word? Yeah, sure. So when we think about the engagement building block, we're thinking about ways in which people get to be a part of their community, whether that's a school community, a larger community, a state community, the larger world, right? But how are they evolving? How are they connecting with one another in the community? How is the community promoting resilience, right? How are they offering these spaces for social connection, for civic engagement, for knowing that I have a place in this world where I matter and what I do matters. So for me, I tend to spend a lot of time like engaging people first, with my work, if that can then try to go outward in the community. So I think that for a lot of families, it can be scary, like accessing those kinds of supports and resources in the community, especially for the first, second, or maybe third time. So I tend to, explore with them, make those phone calls with them, even like attend about for families. And even like going back to just home visiting, this have to just serve out in the community, but if we're at home and we can do something together as a family, like, yeah, I'm with you and we're finding a game here to live in. We're just taking this time together to remember like what it is to have fun as a family. To know they might be facing quite adverse experiences, and it's important to remember, to go back to be then.
It kind of goes back to the first building block, and that relationship to connection, and folks don't have natural supports in place, or their natural supports are not healthy, or there's systemic or generational trauma that is kind of perpetuating these patterns that they are trying to relearn or unlearn. Then those community connections can be really important in replacing some of relationships, healthier relationships and healthier examples. But that can be really difficult because, if you have these established relationships in place, we see how that can go with these established, especially the generational stuff, that gets challenging for people, like, why you think you're better than me, that kind of stuff, that's hard. So it takes a lot of support and a lot of community to help families through that and, out of that into something more productive and better for them. So I think utilizing those resources can be super, super helpful. Also, knowing what's available and just getting to the resources can be really hard. And so I know, like at UCS, we're trying to do more to get the resources to people versus having people come to us, because even just that one step is a barrier. It is for me. I don't like going places again. So us being able to meet people where they are, and it's just that much easier.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point to Rachel, about on a good day, people can be reluctant to engage in community because, we're coming out of like the post-COVID things, more virtual, like just the fact that we all get to be in this room, like this, saying hello to somebody out there waiting at me. I don't remember the last time I saw you in person, right? And like, that was not the case 7-8 years ago. And that, when we think about children or we think about families, people in general, and the importance of those relationships and being in a relationship, a lot of those connections come from being able to be involved in your community, right? To feel like you have a purpose. So whether that's from a child in the classroom having a classroom job and I'm contributing in this way, or we're gathering old blankets to bring to our local animal shelter, or whatever ways in which I can begin to see myself as an important member of this bigger community ecosystem is incredibly important. This isn't necessarily the best example of community events, but it reminds me of, I work in a nonprofit, we do a lot of fundraising, right? We work with a lot of donors. And then once a year, we do a direct market fundraising, like, where you send the things home and people order stuff. Everybody hates that, let's be honest. If you're a parent, you're like, not another one of these. But here's the thing that I've noticed over the years. For those who may be struggling financially or not helping resources, maybe others due to, make a donation or give in some way, they can effectively give back, because they can go to their networks. They can feel like I'm an important part of this school community because I'm also helping you support it, right? And I don't have to do that with money. I could do that with my own family, my own friends. And it's pretty amazing to see that happen, like how for some families it actually brings on this great sense of connection and pride that like I got to be a part of this. So even, others may, I often think about, so like what is that a privilege? And I start to think, I didn't like do this drought marketing fundraiser. But beyond that, also just thinking about where in our communities, what are we offering to families? How do they have an opportunity to connect? One of the things I know UCS have a lot of different community and family events, thinking about Sunrise sponsoring a lot of play groups, right? And that's a great place, especially for people to come together for a common thing, my children, because they'll love to come and, be with and talk about their children and how can they connect and see themselves as broader than just where I am. Right. And the interesting part too, and being able to engage people in civic engagement, they're giving back. This interesting phenomenon, how it happens when I ask you, or you ask me for help, and I help you, that I'm going to be more willing or more open than asking you for help when I need it. Right. So being a helper can actually lead to people who need to seek resources being more willing to be on the other side of that and these would help you.
So let's take examples from the fourth building block. And can you remind us what that was? It was emotional growth. Yeah, so emotional growth example, can you work?
I was kind of thinking about, again, keep on my composite for you, but helping families with opportunities for emotional growth to me looks like, helping them teach their kids their emotions and their feelings, and just all feel like they are valid, and making them talk about it, and just like the expression of them and then like your reaction. So that's one way. Like if I mark that for me, love solid. Now just sense of salary. Good. All right. Go learn. Okay. I think that's an important thing. You're just seeing just, not every individual or assembly we work with, come from a background that understands the importance of social emotional learning, right? And so people can't teach or do what they don't know. You can't do that. You have to have some reference of how children grow and develop, how holding space for those emotions and not labeling those emotions as these are the good emotions, these are the bad emotions, or being fearful of some emotions, right? Especially if you're working with families who have experienced adversity and trauma, different feelings, different expression of emotions are they're gonna feel a certain way about that. Right? It's very possible that there may be more emotions they're more comfortable with and less emotions that they're comfortable with. So giving them opportunities to explore those emotions, right? And to understand them, and to also get away from it's beyond sad, mad, happy, fearful. There is so many more emotions that we could go around this room for the next hour and name emotions, and we still wouldn't name all of those emotions. And I think also this idea of being present with the emotions, staying with the emotions, not looking to change the emotion, not looking to, oh, you're sad, oh, okay, here's a toy, right? Here's your favorite toy that's making you happy. It's let's honor that emotion and where you are in this moment, and then, bring you back to center, to help you come back to a state where your nervous system is a little more calm. But when we immediately go to that with children or adults, it doesn't really help people process the emotion, and then they're not going to be able to grow, right? And really, social emotional learning is the foundation of everything that begins with relationships. Social emotional learning, that's pretty much how you define early childhood education. Not to simplify it, but right, that's the thing here all the time. As children transition and they go off to school or move up in grades, their social emotional foundation needs to build on itself, right? And so if they're not ready for the next phase, their brains are not going to be open for learning. And we really have to honor that and cultivate that and sort of do some emotions coaching and support people in that expression of emotions, understanding emotions, validating emotions. All of those things are a part of that emotion.
I think there's something you said about being able to kind of sit with discomfort. It's something that kids are not great at right now. And I definitely think, electronics and social media have a part in that. Sound like overly, but we definitely pushed kids to get over their emotions quickly. When they're dysregulated, it's like, how quickly can we get them regulated? When sometimes they need to sit with their discomfort and, would not be, we'd have to be pushing them to feel well, better, happy, as soon as possible. Sometimes you need to sit with discomfort, especially if there is something, maybe you said something that was hurtful to somebody, and now it's a natural consequence that you're feeling badly about what you said, and so that's some discomfort, and process it and think, maybe I won't say that again because that feels really bad, So, and that leads you to emotional growth. If you force yourself out of that emotion or somebody tries to say, no, it's totally fine, don't worry about it, they overreacted, there's no growth there. You would just moving on to the next thing. I think those things are really important. Also, I think when we're talking about emotional growth in children, I think a lot of times children expect the adults to connect with the parents about their needs. Like a lot of times when parents bring kids into the office, for me, they're surprised when I connect directly to the child and I'm saying, well, what is it that you want? What do you, how do you do? What do you want to do? Versus the parent saying, see, they're always like this, or they always talk like this, or they always do this. Like, well, your problem isn't necessarily their goal, and so what you see as growth isn't going to be what they see as growth, and your goal for that isn't their goal. It's not this. That's not the same thing, and that's not how we see emotional growth. Is your emotional growth, So connecting with the child and trying to bridge that gap between the parent and the child. That's if you can do that, that's amazing. That's really that's great. But being able to connect the child on that and build an ally there, that it is really important.
Yeah, and I think filling that gap is so dependent on where the parent or the care provider is in emotional growth, right? And how open are they to sitting with the discomfort? How comfortable are they with their own feelings that they might be having, right? Like, okay, well, this is the 10th time today that my child has done fill in the blank. How am I navigating that? And what's my comfort level in navigating that? It can be really, really important to look at with family. Because I think it is often easy to refocus the complexity onto the child when we have to, and that's whether you're an educator, you're a practitioner, you're a parent or caregiver. I mean, what can we control is how we interface in that moment, right? How we respond, how we are demonstrating our own display of emotions in a healthy way, and how that then impacts what they're taking in, what they're learning, and even the interactions between one another, between, if there's a two-adult household, right, or if there's a classroom where there's more than one educator, they are taking in every moment how you're interacting, what you're saying, what you're not saying. Children are very intuitive. They get that. They feel that.
So taking these examples from your work and extending it out to the work of our audience, how can educators, healthcare providers, community partners, how can they incorporate all the principles into their daily interactions?
I'm sure. So, I mean, I think it's always a good starting point to start with like how you show up, right? Do you show up with curiosity? Are you showing up with empathy and respect? Like all of those things matter. And what are you cultivating internally in the internal culture in your organization, right? Are you ensuring your employees have access to those building blocks? Because that's foundational, right? We need to make sure that everyone that's interacting with families and children also has access to building blocks, right? Because we want to make sure that they have an understanding of what they look like, and the best understanding of having what that looks like is recognizing it in our own lives. Like, what do these building blocks look like for me? Also looking at your organization practices. What do your intake forms look like? What do your policies look like? What's being projected to the families and the children and the employees, right? Are all of your questions on the intake form about the challenges or the deficits that are happening in the family's life? Or are you asking things like, oh, like you had mentioned with the mapping, who are the important people in your life? What brings you joy? Where do you find moments of connection? What's your ideal environment, right? Thinking about that and really using that strengths-based language of like naming what's right, not only what's concerning. Tell me about all the wonderful things that are happening in your life right now. Like, what are the top three, like, your family highlights? And then, like, creating, like, those warm handoffs, those transitions to other services that might be helpful to the family. But really position families, and I know you all know this, right? Like, none of what we're saying is like, you all know this, but sometimes you have to think about it in a different lens of, like, how are you positioning that partnership and not looking at a family or a child as something to fix, a problem to fix, right? And we can all, like, in times of stress, we can go back to that thinking, right? A teacher comes into me and this is what's happening, right? Like, I just want to fix it and move on. But am I really taking a moment to understand, what am I hearing? What are you experiencing? What is the child experiencing, right? And really thinking about how do we partner together to decide, what it is that is going to be the best course of action for you. What are choices are you offering families and children instead of saying, let's try this. But like really giving people choices to decide, like, this is what's going to be best for them.
And what challenges arise when we try to focus on strengths and hope, especially when adversity might be really significant? What are the challenges? How do we overcome those challenges?
Yeah, it can get really uncomfortable, right? Like, or even dismissive. Often when we think about this idea of hope or the science of the positive as being like, oh, toxic positivity, right? And so that challenge is holding both truths at once, right? Acknowledging pain and adversity, and this stuff is really hard, and possibility, and a positive that can come out of it, and the strengths that you still hold as an individual, as a child, as a family, as an organization, to build on those, right? Because when we know when families are under stress, systems are under stress, right, it leaves a little space for those moments of really acknowledging what's possible here, and really we can get stuck in the pain. That's really horrible. Like, that's not to say we don't want to empathize, right? But if we're only focusing on what the problem is, we're never going to be able to instill that idea of hope and possibility in our family, because we get stuck in the problem. Because honestly, probably, I don't know, I guess 85 to 90% of the problems are not something we're going to be able to fix, right? So that side does not have a solution, maybe even more than that. But how we help them through that experience, how we help them shift what their experience might be, even going through hard things, that's where the power is, right? That's when hope comes in. That's where we can really cultivate those positive experiences. And again, like, really supporting one another as colleagues and supporting the people that you employ, because nothing will erode hope quicker than burnout. Like, that's just the truth of it. If you're burnt out, you can't find the hope, you're not going to be able to show the hope to others. It's just going to be impossible. And hope is also not about ignoring hardship, but refusing to let hardship be the whole story. It can't be the whole story. So I'm, learning about this whole concept in real time, I want to say, but said about toxic positive-based intensity because that's something that makes me feel worried that, if the family network with our having an industry, we've had different, I don't want being like a cheerleader, but let's go and worry. But at the same time, I appreciate this shift perspective from focusing the adversity and stability for the whole challenge.
I mean, I could be able to rate the temperature, read the road, then, if there are some times where, it's going to be more appropriate than, to focus on the positive, then, and not, there's not going to be other times where it's more appropriate to focus on the negative, but just less appropriate to overly focus on positive, because I think it could be felt as patronizing to some people in certain situations, but they just need to understand that the purpose behind the philosophy, and this isn't to minimize the effect of the trauma or what you've gone through. It's because we believe that there is positive effects that we had from positive experiences, and that some of this could be turned around and could be a positive effect of the future. That's not to minimize, again, every good devastating experience. But so, I'm just envisioning it in my head, some of my life, experiencing some positive language from me, it'd be like, but with the right excellent effectiveness, it could go a long way for sure. Mm-hmm.
So before we turn it over to the audience for the Q&A session, what is one story from your work for each of you that illustrates the power of open action?
From the thing, maybe sure. So a recent story from my work working in our shared day school really was when I had a young child's world just changed pretty suddenly recently. One day their mom was there, and then without warning, their mother was detained by immigration authorities, and the child was separated from their primary care provider. At that point, pretty much their sole care provider, and the person that made that child world feel safe. Right? Routines changed, mornings didn't feel the same, afternoons felt different, and a very small child was carrying a very big loss. And we knew that we were going to be able to fix what had happened, but we can decide how we're going to hold that child through this experience. And so when we're thinking about those relationships, we made sure that that child stayed connected to the educators they already trusted. So it came at a time at the beginning of the school year when children would be absolutely transitioning into new classrooms. Well, we delayed that immediate transition, right? It was a much slower progression. When the child looked for comfort, there was always a adult educator there who the child was familiar with. So when they did go visit their new classroom, they had their regular person come with them. We also had worked hard to build a relationship with the second parent who was now stepping in as the caregiver, really listening for, trying to understand the whole situation, making sure that they felt supported and welcomed as part of the community. When we were looking at the environment, during a time when things felt super uncertain, we wanted to make sure that the child's life stayed fairly predictable and calm. Being able to share photos of the absent parent, being able to provide voice contact. There was alternate care environment that was needed so that the secondary parent could continue working at night. And so we were able to connect this family with another family in the community where the children knew one another. So the parents hadn't yet known each other, but the children did. So the child now was being cared for overnight. So the parent support at least had some familiarity with the other children in the family, and doing things like, a meal train for the family to alleviate some of the financial burden. But really what we focused on was, what are the child's favorite foods? What are their comfort meals, right? So not just what can you provide, but what can you provide that's going to be meaningful to this child specifically and to this family. And of course, when you think about that emotional growth piece, offering that comfort, those calm voices, being patient, giving the child an opportunity to be with their trusted people and with those relationships, giving them simple ways to calm their body and not rushing them back to being okay, right? We just honored where they were. And because emotional growth isn't going to come from fixing the pain. It comes from helping a child to understand that pain, to honor that pain, to be in that pain and with that. And so we were really able to intentionally buffer some of the trauma and stress that was caused by the situation, but we felt much more prepared for reunification a couple of months later when the parent and child was up and the parent was able to return to our community. There's no doubt it is a complex situation, and it's one that we're working with the family every single day. This child is thriving. This child is continuing to make progress. This child can feel safe, and mom can feel safe in that situation. And we are seeing an engagement in a little bit different way that we even had before, and being able to provide these additional support so they can navigate whatever is going to come in the future.
And it's a true story. For those I have notes, so just to be fair, I get really nervous speaking, and people say, no, you don't. I really do. And so if I don't have notes, I will either undertalk or overtalk. I know most of you in this room have never heard me undertalk, but it does happen. That's kidding.
Well, I'm thinking of some work with a young woman who was having a hard time attending school consistently. So, when I met her, it seemed like her goal was very small. And they were in her apartment with her caregiver. But, over the course of the time that we worked together, we showed in lots of different things for her. So some of that included mental health support, some of that, I call them enrichment activities now. And so the things that she was interested in that she liked for say, so some more type writing, she started working in CS and has Brad's bed. So I'm going to say all the public that are really installable. Anecdotally, it did inject a lot of hope in the family, and I did notice changes. So, or that she got out and was participating in the community, progressing in therapy. She wasn't able to talk about with me and her caregiver, and needed to say well, this is how I'm feeling, and even come up with solutions for how she felt like she might be able to get comfortable. So the care provider today, I'm feeling she was right, but don't think flourishing, but progressing with the hope that she could do this and do the things that she needed to in a commitment for sure.
So I know there's a bajillion stories that's so frustrating. They're never the best, but I'm thinking of a mother and 3 children who have had generational trauma and who recognized a similar pattern occurring with her own child and really wanted to do something about it. They didn't know what to do. And so sought help from everybody. And again, recognize, I know that this is happening. I don't know what to do. I don't want him to end up like me. And that's such a vulnerable place to be in, to acknowledge that, things are not going well, things didn't go well for you, and admitting that you need help. And so the child is in residential treatment now, which is not the, most desirable outcome, but it's not also the worst outcome. And she's hoping that there would be a better outcome for her long term. But I think, that's just, it's to say that she's trying to recreate positive experiences for him to reverse the negative.
Okay, so let's over to questions and comments from the audience for our panelists. Go ahead.
So, our kind of children question. So I work with children, obviously, but I've noticed that with, some young adults or adults who maybe have experienced, they have significant patients, we talked about the importance of the consistency, continuity, all that sort of thing. And I observed that some of those folks who maybe didn't have that when they were younger kind of don't know how to function in that stability. Like they're so used to, like you were saying, that they can't feel comfortable in a stable environment, and then will almost create sort of that chaos and stuff too that's familiar. And so I'm absolutely, hearing what you're saying, that it's so important in childhood, early childhood. I'm just wondering about that sort of middle place, if they haven't had that, well, maybe young, and, how, particularly with young adults, how you work with those folks and help them. And, if we're talking about, maybe parents of the child who get connected or something like that, how can you support them, within that context?
Trying to get them to recognize that is really the first step, because that's only going to continue or get worse, or they're going to see something to kind of treat that, whether it's a substance or because there's going to be some secondary anxiety, whether or not, they realize it, or it's going to create chaos in their interpersonal relationships and, work relationships and things like that. But getting them to realize that is happening is really the first step, that kind of creating continuity one thing at a time. Then just kind of starting there is really, just one thing at a time, whether it's, being the smallest thing, and it's being not weed, but medication may meet that in the middle, at least at the start. But yeah, chaos, also their brain may not slow down, they may not allow their brain to slow down enough, or they may be afraid of their thoughts when their brain does slow down. So, yeah, so therapy, if they're not already, they're a good call to go.
I would also say this, I think that's a really good point, Rachel, about those, what I call those micro moments, right? So maybe the whole thing is chaotic, but every evening at 7 p.m., everyone just stops and they have 2-minute yelling or whatever that is, right? Like how can you, and I think knowledge is power. I think talking and healing about positive childhood experiences and the importance, especially if you want something different for your child, looking at like the heart, there's tons and tons of research at positivexperience.org of like the different health outcomes that you can expect by increasing positive childhood experience. And so like, yeah, I understand that not, some people do function better when things are chaotic, but where are the moments of stability, right? Where are the pieces, and what can we control, right? Like, we can control what happens when they come into school. We can control what happens when you're present on a home visit. We can control what happens when they're coming in for a therapeutic appointment, right? So, like, how are we creating that stable environment, even in those micro-moments, so that both child and adult know what they're going to expect, and they're going to get the same, the same thing every time they interface, right? Whether that's like you every morning, you're like, good morning. That's it. Like, that's their anchor for some people. Like, I'm going to, see this person every morning, or somebody's going to be there to bring me every single morning. I think can be really helpful in just helping people to understand without judgment how we begin to incorporate those building blocks in our own lives or for their children.
That helpful? What other questions do we have for the panelists? I've got one burning in my back pocket and something else.
Great, but the bird, feel.
Well, we've talked a lot about seeing a hope framework in your individual goals, but let's shift it a little bit and think about systems. Like, what small but powerful changes in systems can we make to incorporate this hope framework?
Yeah, I mean, I really think, again, when you think about environment as being more than just furniture, right? And what are you cultivating? What are those touch points? What is the emotional space where families, feel like they belong, that they're a part of? Whether that's learning through both names, and as somebody who's horrible with names, I have to tell you, but it's really important. You can greet somebody by name, and you can greet someone in their native language. When you can just even a couple of sentences be able to converse in a way that says, I see you. I recognize who you are. You are a person that's important in our organization, our program, our agency, in your own home, right? And being able to give them that respect and try to build that trusted relationship, and really understanding that, like, it takes time, right? Like, it takes a lot of time. And so I got to open up question. I was thinking about, like, that system. It's like, how do we interface with one another? What do these building blocks look like in our systems? Where are the relationships, right? Like, we know that systems are only going to be as strong as the relationships within those systems. No change comes if there are no relationships within the system, between different systems, between different organizations, right? We know that we have to find that common ground. So we think about the building blocks. Where are we cultivating in our community? What is the environment of our community? Where are we supporting people with feeling like they could be in a safe neighborhood? Are we supporting people in having affordable housing? Are we supporting people with affordable health care, access to child care, as Christine mentioned? Where in our systems are those building blocks present? And there's lots of resources out there to look at, like, what is that, right? Like, when you say, well, you can look at your policies, you can look at your intake forms. So what does that look like? What is the measure of that? And being active, right? Because, like, when you're inactive, it's like you're saying, like, that's okay, that doesn't matter. Because you're actively looking at these things and the places where we can make improvements to build hope, to build positive experiences. That's something we have some control over what happened at the system level. Does that make sense?
My advice would be, don't be a variable, be a constant. If you're a supervisor, make sure if your employees, they're scheduling appointments, you're following through with appointments, you're not no-showing, you're not canceling at the last minute. That needs to be the exception, not the rule, especially if you're working with children. That seems like a small detail, but it's extremely, extremely important. These guys need to be able to count on you, and they can't count on anyone else. And that needs to be, like, where it all starts, and continue to build from there. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. If there's going to be a change, you're anticipating a change or a change in schedule, tell them like a week ahead of time. Even if you think it's not a big deal, let them know ahead of time. All of these things matter.
And I'm also thinking about the systems level or the state level, and in particular, one of the things that's happening. So the FOOP framework, which I should have said really was designed by Dr. Sege and his colleagues through Tufts University. I think you encourage you to check out the website because research is amazing on there, and I'm very committed to this work. And one of the ways they've received all this data, all this research, is through the birth surveys. Not going to remember what it stands for, but it's your behavior risk survey for your state that gets done. And Vermont State is also a part of that. And Vermont no longer asks about ACEs, but for years and years and years, states would only ask about ACEs, right? Like what's happening in our state in this lens, and not ask about positive childhood experiences. So other states started asking about PCEs. And so that's how they started to get all this data and research. And so one of the things we are doing at the state level is I am working with a coalition in central Vermont to be able to work together to get the PCE questionnaire on the purpose study for Bennington. So like things like that, where you're raising awareness at different levels, just around like, hey, there's this thing you should know about, and this is really important, right? And then maybe it's time to start shifting that narrative from these are the ACEs, or this is how many ACEs a family has, to like, let's look at this, look at how many PCEs your health has or new have. And isn't that amazing, right? Because words matter, few flight matters, and management system level depth. So being able to incorporate that mind shift, I think, is really critical in making real difference that trickle down to that organization's practitioners daily.
And
a little comment. So, this is a little bit different from what I thought when doing courses, going to South Florida, Bachelor, B. And I'm up with preschoolers, so I'm part of the high school, so I see a lot of high school students, and, a lot of them have had a lot of trauma. And, it seems like a lot of them lived in that trauma, right? So for me, when I first heard about this, I was thinking of, shifting the lens to thinking about, teenagers who've already experienced, it's not, necessarily providing it for my littles so that they have that already, but to think about, to help those that age adolescents look at what those positive experiences were in their lives that they did have, right? Because it seems like, even just my role of being connected, students, they talk to me a lot about the things that had a lot of things happen, but all the different things that were happening. And can we try to focus on that to help heal the other part? And continuing to focus on what they're still children, right? And so what positive childhood experiences are they having now? So for example, at the adolescent level, one of my colleagues in another state, for their substance use prevention program in their school, where you get suspended, or you've got to be, there's some negative consequence, actually not issuing a negative consequence, and having the option for them to have a plan to build their positive experiences, to be rewarded so they can even go 5 days substance free, right? Like looking at these little increments. And so it really, my focus is always, or has been always in years, early childhood ed, but those positive experiences remain incredibly important at the adolescent level. Like, what are their after school opportunities? Where are they finding that civic engagement that, if they're working with you, that is a building block, because they are giving back to the children that you're serving in a school. They're able to be a part of I can do this. I have an important role here. And focusing on those things will help buffer some of the long-term health effects, specifically related to ACEs.
I think something to also remember is that it's okay to remind them that it's okay to experience chief feelings at once. It's okay that you love your father, and it's also okay that you're super pissed off that he did that. You can experience those two emotions at once, right? So when you look back, loved that one thing, or had a great time and you did this, you can still be upset with them about something else that happened, so those two things, they don't negate each other, even if you experience those two emotions at the same time, because that can be difficult for people, especially kids with their black and white thinking, well, this happened, so I can't, do that, or I can't like them because of that, so that can be really conflicting to them, and that's that inner turmoil when you know that they're thinking, so it makes it difficult, but it's something to think of.
And would it be great if they could tell you about their positive child experiences and then help recreate those, if when possible, with the children in their working with? Like, what really stands out as a positive experience that you had in its Evan preschooler? And I'm saying that it's far-bearing. I can't remember the preschooler. I'm just saying if it's possible, though, right? And getting them to think about and offering them opportunities. It's more than let's look on your positive sides. It's really not about that. It's about what are the opportunities to mitigate the adverse with something positive. And I think if everyone, took even a few minutes and thought about what that looks like in your work today, everybody, and some ways where you're offering those, just being there. Like you said, they're talking to you, right? They have a trusted adult. Relationships, number one building block. They have a relationship with you. So if you want to know what you can do to help them continue that relationship, do exactly what you're doing.
So I was thinking about, when you were talking about, children's feelings and not rushing them out of that feeling, right? And, I think one of the things that's probably really difficult for most of us is that, we're in these professions because we probably have a lot of empathy, right? And we want to help. And I think that makes it a little bit hard because we're feeling kind of with them, it's really uncomfortable for us, and I wonder if that's part of why we're going to move on now, and I thought, and I was really struck by something you said about children that dysregulated and how we're trying to make them be regulated as quickly as possible. And, sometimes that's because they're hurting other children and they're throwing chairs around the room or whatever. Say there is a piece of that, but also, I had talked to a mom recently, and she was, talking with us about her child, and she's very, attuned to him. And, she said sometimes when he's in that place, he just needs to, get to the peak of that and then come back, right? And there's not a lot you're going to be able to do with. And I think that, I think that's really hard. Caregivers, and for families, for educators, whoever, right? I think it's so it's really interesting. But I was, because I was thinking about, what as adults, a lot of us people that we often do, when we're upset, we might talk to a friend, or we'll listen to, if you're sad and you listen to sad songs, right? You're feeling sad, and and that helps you process, right? If you're not getting out of that feeling, you're sitting in it and right in it, right? And but that also, because that also creates a connection. We're okay, whoever made this song obviously has felt what I felt, right? And I think that putting it's sort of helping me in reframing that. So no, I'm sitting there with the child who's, really, having a hard time. You can't help wanting to make it better and recognizing that that's not always what you need to do in the moment. And so kind of framing it in that way of, okay, when I'm upset, what do I need, right? It's not that you're the same, person, but different. The country needs something, to sit in that moment. Then I think that's a really important point, because I think a lot of us are guilty of trying to move them out of everyone's you can. Particularly when you pass schedules and you should, because you're trying to keep your teams, right? And all those things. So it's a really, really difficult but interesting one. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I was thinking my mom's favorite. Anyone knows my mom, Deborah Neos, that's her favorite line. Whose needs are being met? And so I have to remind myself, like, whose needs are being met by rushing this kid or this person out of this situation? It's mine because I need to get to the next thing. Right? Yeah. So, but even if we're talking about adult, de-escalation, I went to the FBI crisis negotiation training program. Time and space, time and space, time and space. So why are we pushing children to hurry up, hurry up, hurry up? Time and space. Like, if they're obviously if they're causing physical harm or property damage, surely their property damage. I'm like, just whatever. It's not my property, but time and space. Like if we can, we should. Because otherwise it's making other people feel uncomfortable, So if we really should do that more, so anyways, but yeah, it's hard and it is uncomfortable. It makes us feel uncomfortable and it's hard to watch sometimes. But yeah, something to think about. So just
And bringing the child's place to the table, if it's uncomfortable for us, imagine how uncomfortable it is for them. Right? If we're feeling this and we're not experiencing what experiencing is, inside of their little pockets, and then they're experiencing first counts. Think about how uncomfortable we might be in that moment, or getting strength.
Any last question before we wrap it up?
I have a question, but if they don't care about important family, looking at the whole family and work, bringing the family into the birth of the child, because talking about children that are dysregulated, we may have the skills to help them, or ways to live with the families, know how to do that, sitting with emotions. Is that something that they're able to do at that home? It's great if they have an outlet school or wherever it is, but then do they have that at home to a greater family into the work to make sure that they're having positive experiences at all in their interaction?
That's like the ideal, right?
Well, thank you all for attending the second session. There will be a third session in May, so be on the lookout for an invite. We have all of your emails to RSVP'd, and you will get a personal invite to the third session, which will be on resources in Bennington County to address gate service. So feel free to take the last few minutes to grab some more food at work, and if you haven't had the sign-in sheet come around to you yet, there are forms later out, so please do sign in. And thank you again for attending, and thank you to our wonderful panel.